Coffee. So, I remember once, years ago, I was friends with someone for a long time. Very intelligent person, quite a lovely person actually. And their mother once said to them, "How can you talk to him? He's the enemy." That was fascinating to me. The comment was fascinating. It really stuck with me. Because we often might think that when someone sees us, they see what we see about ourselves. But it's actually very different. It is that they see something else. And sometimes what they see about you is something you don't see about you. And sometimes it's something about you that has nothing to do with you. It's not a causal relationship. It's not because you are you, they will see something. It's quite often that the brain projects onto you what they want to see or need to see, or their biases or perception of reality allows them to see or affords them to see sometimes. And it may or may not coincide with who you believe you are or who you are, which of course are not the same thing. And the second one actually might be unknowable. But we can slowly discover parts of ourselves as we get older, or eliminate parts of ourselves that we're not, or we used to be. How's that? It actually quite upset me, that comment. Not because of the person at all. The person making the comment was, in their world, genuinely believing this to be the case. I would say, I would afford them that. And so what upset me about it was that we as humans have such a low resolution of the world that it divided us in that particular example for no reason other than our own particular beliefs. And my view being that I don't necessarily hold these boundaries to be quite rigid. And especially, for example, with some cultures, I have more linguistic, anthropological, historical, genetic ties than others, and yet even the ones that seem far away are not that far away. And it doesn't take that much. You learn a few words in certain languages, recognize the linguistic origins of languages, find out where it branches off from your own linguistic origins, and then you realize it's not that far by any stretch. So I felt bad for her that she had to view the world in that way. But it also made me realize that many people clearly must view it in that way to some degree. So it will limit certain people from talking to other people. And then it creates the us and them over time. And then you start to imagine what others are saying and what they're not. And you'll see it in front of your face. I saw a YouTube video last night where it had over 1 million views in the first day. And the person was talking about things that are happening around and then say they. And many of you remember from Periscope, 10 years ago, I was talking about people saying they. And you ascribe to them what they say, what they are, what they do, what they think, what they want, what they don't want. And then the person listening hears that and projects onto a group which is ill-defined these desires that they hear from someone else. So they get cognitively primed to think certain things that may or may not be true. But even if they're not true, they get confirmed just by one's own bias. So it could be that you hear on YouTube someone say they don't like you, for example, and then you walk down the street and you see someone you think is one of the they, and as you walk past, they're just talking with their friend or they're just looking straight ahead. And then you might take it as, oh, see, they were right on YouTube. They didn't say hello. They didn't even look at me. So, yes, that's right. They don't like me. And this type of stuff is happening in people's heads all the time. All of us. It's unless you're consciously aware that it's happening, it's very easy to allow that to become reality. And by the end of the day, you haven't even thought about it, but your bias has been reinforced without you even realizing. So you might actually sit there at the end of the day and think, wow, that person was rude. That person hates us. G'day, Elijah. But it turns out that it's actually not true at all. Someone just said, could you turn your head? I'm super interested. Okay, thanks. Anyway, so an example of certain ideologies. I'm going to use Hezbollah today, but it can be any ideology, whether it's Marxism, communism, Christian nationalism, any ideology you want to pick. And an ideology is a framework which allows one to perceive the world in a way that is quicker, and it can provide many benefits, but of course, a number of dangers. So when I think it was 1975, 76, when the Palestinian Liberation Organization was kicked out of Jordan and invaded southern Lebanon, they, for whatever reason, I'm not going to blame or not blame, okay, for that group it was existential. And they decided, I use the word they, the group decided to take over southern Lebanon, make it their own state, and use that to go to war with the state of Israel. Now, again, I'm not trying to take any particular side here. I'm trying to more talk about why an ideology can emerge, and this is about the emergence of Hezbollah and why killing people doesn't seem to remove an ideology. Well, what happened was that when the PLO did this, of course, people were on the ground, people who are just living there in southern Lebanon are having their homes, for example, broken into by the PLO, for example. And again, I'm not trying to blame anyone in particular. And then their houses were being used as shelters, hideouts, war zones. Now, if you in America or Australia, wherever, imagine someone jumping into your house, even if they're right or not, or you sympathize or empathize with them or not, it can have quite a drastic psychological effect on you. And over years, just imagine, you're 17 and this happens, and you see your mother and father sort of have to bring food to people who are, using your house as a war zone, even if you agree or don't agree with what's going on. You then are 23 and this is still the case. Just imagine, like your whole teenage life that this has happened. And then when Israel decided to invade in 1982, because they'd had enough of this type of war at the time, was that the initial, once they invaded and removed the PLO and pushed them out to Tunisia, which is, for those of you who don't know, in North Africa, sort of halfway to, roughly, say half or 3/4 of the way to Spain from the Middle East, not that far. They were relieved, and people were grateful that this is, we in general, not everyone, but in general, they were happy that they were liberated by, or not by Israel necessarily, but they were liberated from this being held hostage for 6 years by the members of the PLO. But unfortunately, what happens at this point? Well, for people who are in Israel at the time, whether one agrees with them or not, that's not even my issue, right? I'm not here to debate that. What actually happens is that they are concerned that if they leave, that the PLO could come back. So they stay. But unfortunately, the people on the ground don't see this. What they see is that now we've lost one occupying force and it's moved to another occupying force. So what does that do? That creates resistance and resentment. That resentment starts to build. Now, of course, Israel can't stay there. Just like any foreign power, it becomes very difficult to stay somewhere and occupy it. So what happens is that they take advantage of the fact that the civil war had caused Lebanon to split along, not exactly, but along Christian Muslim lines, or along Arabic non-Arabic lines, along Semitic Arabic lines, something like that. And it's a bit more complicated than that, but that's roughly the case. Now, the government, of course, split into different governments. This is what happens in civil wars, and you have a rogue government which comes down into the south, led by I'm going to say something like the equivalent of a Christian nationalist. And when they took over the south, Israel took advantage of that and armed them and weaponized them to take over the south of Lebanon. And then they became a proxy army for Israel. Now, this was very hard for people in the south to accept, because now they were being patrolled by people of their own country, but it was obvious that the people patrolling them were doing it on behalf of a foreign country. So that now they felt occupied indirectly by their own people. So it's almost like they felt like, it's like when someone dobs on you and goes, with someone more powerful to come against you, even though it's sort of someone from your own family or your neighbor. And this does not go down very well. So then a resistance started coming up to constantly bomb and attack and kill this proxy power. Now, in any place, you get that type of power to the people movement, and more people start to join it. So what I'm trying to say here after 12 minutes is that that movement becomes something that gives people hope, right? And again, I'm not saying I'm for or against it at all. I'm just explaining how the movement, before it became Hezbollah, was already gaining power and support and winning hearts and minds. Not because they were Hezbollah, but because people were seeing them as liberating them from their occupiers. So now you might be able to see that, as opposed to killing the members to destroy the group creates the members. So it works backwards. And so that's why if you kill the head of a group, the group doesn't go away, because the reasons for the group emerging are still there. The way to get rid of it is to actually remove the reasons for the group to be there in the first place. So the question is how you do that. Well, the way you do that is by recognizing what caused the emergence in the first place. So it wasn't, oh, look, there's a group called Hezbollah, or there's a group called the Marxists, or the Bolsheviks, or the communists, for example. There were certain underlying patterns, issues, stresses, forces, and that leads to the rise of some group which eventually inherits a certain name. So it's a long story about why that emerges. And there's so much more, obviously, I can tell you, from 1982 till, I think it was 2000, roughly around 2000, when Ehud Barak in Israel decided, and along with the Israeli people, that this was enough and that they were going to move out. But of course, by doing that, it allowed a power vacuum, which allowed the modern version of Hezbollah to rise. And this was a problem. It's a long story, because then Hezbollah changed. Because what happens when the reason for your group to emerge disappears? Now, the reason that it emerged, as I said, was because there was a growing, desperate need to liberate the south of Lebanon. But once they liberated the south of Lebanon, what's the point of them being there? So, in many cases, the group needed to create that point because it's existential for them. People's lives, they were earning their money, their living, their power, their meaning in life from being part of this group that was, whether it's true or not, the first Arab group to force an Israeli, in their mind, Israeli occupier to leave their region. So they won these awards, not awards, but they won adulation of people, etc. But what do? Well, you have to somehow justify the your need to still be there. So to do that, you have to continue to make the original occupier the continued enemy. This is not done consciously, by the way. This is people desperately looking for ways, like everyone does, sadly, to justify why they keep doing what they're doing, even when the reason is no longer what it was. For their reason of being there and having people support in the first place. So this becomes quite a problem. So what happens in Lebanon at this point? Well, a lot of people don't know this, but Lebanon is not a nation in the way that many people think it is. It is a collection of mini states and mini groups of linguistic, ethnocultural, and ethno-religious constructs, which are very, very historically quite distinct. So, as I've said before, it would be like, imagine having one country in South Canaan called Palazrael, and in Palazrael you had Hebrew people, Jewish people, Arabic Israelis, and Christian Palestinians, Muslim Palestinians. But they were all in one country. Right? So Lebanon is something like that, to a slightly lesser degree, but to a large extent quite like that too. So you have all these different types of ethnicities, and it's a zero-sum game because each mini group is trying to make sure they don't get destroyed by the other groups, and at the same time simultaneously trying to destroy the other groups. So it's a constant push and pull effect. So people obviously were always going to have hatred for Hezbollah, who were in different ethno-religious constructs within the same mini state, or the same state, sorry. So there was always going to be people wanting to get rid of Hezbollah. Now, the more Hezbollah gained power, and the more it needed to turn Israel into a continued enemy, I'm not saying it is or it isn't, but the more they had to really double down on that, it was making them more and more of an existential risk to Israel, because they were now getting backed by Iran and by Syria. So everyone in Lebanon who either didn't support Hezbollah or hated Hezbollah would hate them even more, because now they're worried that, well, this group is becoming, g'day Akal, becoming an existential threat to Israel, and so that puts them in the firing line. So now they want Hezbollah gone. So the question is, at this point, would anyone from these other groups, either intentionally or unintentionally, help Israel destroy Hezbollah? Well, we don't know, but it seems unlikely that zero would be doing so. So we now have reached a point where Hezbollah has dragged Lebanon, according to other people in Lebanon, into more and more wars and destruction, which has now happened again. And people have had enough, and I dare say it might be the time that they might somehow find a way to remove the presence. However, this is not going to be done that easily, and you might ask why. Well, it comes back to why ideologies emerge in the first place. So as I said back in 12 minutes, 23 seconds, something like that, the reason that the ideology emerged in the first place was because of a ground movement that was happening before the ideology even fully formed. Now, the ground movement needed to be there for people, or they believed it needed to be there because of the existential threat they thought they were in, and they were getting, and it gives them meaning and purpose and food and medicine and shelter. So if you remove the leadership, does the ideology still emerge again? And the answer is to some degree yes, because until you satisfy the conditions on the ground such that there is no need for certain ideologies to emerge, then they will emerge in some fashion. And this will continue. So, as long as people believe that some occupying force has come in and stolen land, as long as other people believe that their existence is under threat, as long as we have the concept of these identities, and hence, as I said in the beginning, others are the enemy, this will continue and nothing will change. And maybe 100 years from now, same thing. So, what I mean is that I would say that the problem is endogenous to the existence of humanity itself, and the way that we cling onto identity, which is not really a choice in some countries. We're lucky in the West. We can step back and say, well, maybe we're not necessarily our ancestors. Thank you. But we can't say that in places where there's no luxury to do so. So, for example, if you're in Ukraine and you're getting attacked simply for being Ukrainian, you could leave, change your language, change your culture. But of course, a part of you has to die for that to happen. And I've seen that a lot in Australia. Right? I've seen people who escaped the Iraq War of 2003 who had children and struggle 20 years later with the fact that their children are speaking a language different to their own and have a culture different to their own. And it feels like a part of them died and they couldn't pass that to their children. So that suffering continues. And that's pretty much it. Anyway, it was a pleasure to see you. I'm going to now go do some work because I got to finish my PhD paper. Well, the next one anyway. All right, well, don't forget to take one smack at a time.